how do you identify first that there's a problem either in culture or like in the leader?
Yeah, no, good question. Good question. I think it's about assessing where they're at, finding out who's who in the zoo, where their energy levels are at, where their engagement is at, and finding out whether their productivity is where it should be. And that's a process of both sort of collecting a bit of data, but also a few interviews. So you get that face to face, reading them, eye to eyeball, if you like. And getting a sense of where they're really at. Because when people start to describe their energy levels, and they score themselves on, say, a scale of 1 to 10, then you can start to get a sense of where they're really at. And then, when you extrapolate that across the whole organization, you can say that, beyond a certain percentage, then there could be something culturally wrong here, as opposed to the certain individuals who are working themselves to the bone and they just need to lighten up, or certain departments are under-resourced, or whatever the root cause is, and then tackle it bit by bit, help them understand that it's an unsustainable practice. It's bad for business. There's an ever decreasing energy cycle, if you like, from an individual point of view and from a business point of view. And so tackling all of those, as I say, bit by bit, is certainly the first step in helping them understand where they're at and what sort of things they need to put into place to help themselves and the people around them. So recognizing it in themselves and recognize it in other people. And one of the early signs is that if you're a caffeine user, you could start becoming a little bit dependent on caffeine. It's a useful crutch, because it does a thing that it blocks adenosine receptors, and adenosine builds up when you wake up, and it builds up over the day. And by the time you get to about 16 hours, it creates this sleep pressure. And what coffee does, or caffeine, it slows that process down. It blocks the receptors. And so your brain thinks that it's got more time and more energy than it. So you're borrowing it in effect from the future. And so, second cup, third cup, fourth cup, that's an early sign that you may be in the habit of doing for yourself. But if you see your colleagues doing it and you see that that's not necessarily their normal behavior, it's a nice early sign that something could be up. And, it's a great way of not only being self-aware, but being aware of those around you.
It's interesting. Yeah, I've heard of the adenosine. I never got it. It's like, yeah, delayed energy. But I didn't do coffee for a long time. Then all of a sudden, I'm about it because I don't eat till dinner. Just because when I eat, I just feel complacent, don't want to work. So I just stopped. And it helps as an appetite suppressant as well as soda water. But I find there's that lag that I was trying to skip at like 3. As you say, the built up sleep pressure. So what do you think about in terms of managing energy throughout the day instead of coffee? Or do you like coffee?
Yeah, I do. And I've had to put disciplines in place. I've had to be quite structured about how I consume it. So my cutoff is midday, no coffee after midday, and I will go herbal teas and that sort of thing in the afternoon. Lots of water. So particularly if you're active and when the weather's hot, you need to increase your water intake. Really important for that, so that cognitive alertness. It's funny, when I've been sort of busy with clients back to back, and I realize I haven't had a lot of water, I'll get to lunchtime and go, God, I feel drowsy. A couple of pints of water, and that drowsiness just gone. It was the dehydration, not the tiredness. So, it's being aware of those little things that can make quite a big difference to how your day goes. But sort of to answer your question, that managing your energy during the day, it all starts with the beginning of the day. And there's 2 key things for me. One of them is getting that light into your eyes in the morning so that you get rid of the melatonin that's sitting in your system from overnight. And it also bookends your day. So that adenosine starts building up from that first light into the eyes. And it helps your brain go, right, clock's ticking, 16 hours later, which should be about bedtime. And the other thing is getting that a decent portion of protein into your diet. Now, if you're skipping like you, that's fine, no problem. You've chosen a different path. That's not necessarily a wrong thing. It works for you, and everybody's different, right? But for me, I have to be fueling. I'm one of those hard gainers that is just, I could eat 10 Big Macs and probably when I was younger get away with it without putting on too much weight. But that protein helps stabilize those blood sugar levels, and those blood sugar levels is where your mood goes throughout the day. So the protein helps to satiate you, keeps you fuller for longer, and then you don't get the roller coaster of energy. You get a much more stable. You'll still get ups and downs depending on the food that you eat, but it will be much more stable. So those are the two key things I would recommend.
On the sugar level thing, I found it quite interesting. So my biggest fear used to be talking to people, funnily enough. And so I did,
Good.
yeah, we're getting better at it.
You've overcome that.
Yeah, slowly but surely, as long as they're on a screen now. So then I would do this, so I got a commissionally sales job to face it. So I had to go out to people on the street and try and sell them something and get rejected by 1,000 people a day and talk to 40. So,
Jeez.
but I noticed that when my sugar levels were consistent, my nerves were less. So it's like when you get low on your sugar levels, you get into fight or flight response and you're more reactive. Have you sort of thought about the contribution of what impacts mood in terms of either diet, environment, in terms of structure or sleep? What have you sort of seen in terms of contributors to burnout?
Yeah, I think it's some people are very food driven. Some people are, oops, I forgot to eat that meal. They're very different. People have different ways of approaching it. And you're right. When your blood sugars do drop, there you start to trigger that cortisol response, which is associated with that fight or flight. And your blood sugars are actually boosted when you go into that fight or flight because your body's preparing to do one or the other. And so that will also have an impact on those blood sugars. So if you can stabilize them from the beginning of the day, you're less likely to ever get down into that dangerous spot where it's been described as being hangry, right? I used to be hangry, and I realized that I was too dependent on carbohydrates. So I shifted the balance of carbs and fats, and I just got to the point where I knew that if I accidentally skipped a meal, it wasn't the end of the world, and I wasn't craving, grabbing the wrong stuff. So it is a really, really big one. Sleep is probably the next one off the block. And in fact, if you think about it, sleep sort of underpins all of those other things anyway. The exercise and the nutrition components of health are very much determined about what happens with that sleep. And, short sleeping was something I didn't realize I was doing. And it wasn't until I bought myself an Oura Ring and started doing a bit of analysis and actually looking at the data, I realized that I was running long days for work, but sleeping short nights and expecting my energy to just be on point every day. And it wasn't. And that's what led me into that burnout phase about 10, 11 years ago, was that, plus not looking after my nutrition well enough, and just assuming that the sleep I was getting was good quality and it was long enough. So those are two big ones, the nutrition side of things and the sleep side of things. But then there are more sort of subtle elements that affect mood, like relationships, financial status, what's going on with your job. Those are all contributors to that mental state. And if you've got something that's gnawing away at the back of your mind all the time, and let's say it's financial, for example, you're in debt and you're trying to pay it back, that never really goes away. And so you could almost say that that's one of those constant stressors that sort of fills I like to use the analogy of the metaphor of a stress bucket. And everybody's got a finite amount of stress before it pours out over the top. And if you've got that one in the back of your mind that's always running, it never goes away. So actually your bucket's always going to be a third full until you can sort that out and find a solution to that problem. And that one that's gnawing away in the back of your mind is solved. And that might be a quick fix or it might be a long fix. But if you have that bucket always fairly full, and then you pile in other things like work stress and relationship challenges and other things, it may not take that long before the bucket's actually overflowing. So on top of the sleep, the nutrition and the exercise, there are those other life factors which need to be put into the mix, because when you are aware of how full your bucket is and how much it takes to overflow your bucket, it's really important to find the tap and the activities that you do to release some of that so that the bucket never overflows. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm interested in I feel like negative thoughts have a faster pace. This is kind of get weird and abstract because I love mindfulness and stuff. But like negative thoughts seem to move faster and excited thoughts seem to move faster, and there's an energy cost. So I often found like when
Mm.
I'm negative, ruminating and thinking on something, then my energy is sapped and also my focus and everything. But what are the strategies you think about in terms of opening that tap and freeing up the negativity?
Yeah, good. So everyone's strategies are different, right? I do this classic workshop where I'll put the piece of paper on the wall and I'll draw a line down the middle and I'll say what fills it, what empties it. And one person wrote fishing, and that's something that empties it. They enjoy fishing, and I stood behind them and watched them write it up, and I went, you know what? If I was you, if you were me, I'd be putting fishing on the other side. It fills my because I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. Right? Sitting there in a boat, bobbing on the ocean, waiting for something to land on a hook is just the most ridiculous way of spending time, in my opinion. Right? So it's very personal in terms of what it is that turns that tap on. So for me, I like movement. I've always been a movement guy for the last sort of 15 or so years, and made a career out of it as well. So moving my body gets me out of my head because I am a ruminator. Like I overthink things enormously. So as soon as I get out of my head by using my body, for me, that's a really great way of turning that tap on, because I have to focus on the movement rather than the thought. And then once I get going, let's say it's going for a run, for example, it's interesting when you're running, the thoughts that you have, they always seem a little bit more positive, and they always seem a little bit more like a solution rather than a problem. And it's funny when, I've done this so many times, I thought, oh, that's a great idea halfway through a run. Then I'll get home and I'll go, shit, what was that idea? Because I'm in a different state when I've finished running. So I should get a pen and write it down on my hand when I'm running, because, in that state, I'm in a really good place. And so, for me, that's one of the big ones. I think one of the others is being around other people, right? Being alone in your thoughts, especially if they're not particularly great thoughts, is not a great place to be. So, sharing time with loved ones, friends, family, that social connection is a really, really big piece in terms of turning that tap on. And for some, it's more important than others. So for extroverts, much more important than introverts. Extroverts get energy from other people. Introverts get energy from being on their own. So, it's horses for courses. But those are some of the things that I think go some way to turning that tap on.
I've been curious about the introvert versus extrovert thing because often the introverts I encounter, sure, there's a degree of energy sapping and they don't get energized by human interactions. It's often there's a gap, there's a distance between how they're behaving and how they really feel. And the greater that distance, the greater the anxiety, or the greater the distance, the more energy sapping it is. Because often they might sit with someone that they know really well and they're chatty, they're open. You always hear these stories of, oh, they're so shy, but once you let loose. So I'm wondering is introverted a genetic thing or is it a conditioning to say that who you really are isn't worth sharing, hence why you sap your energy. So what's your take on introvert versus extrovert? And
It's a great question, because I've done a bit of study on epigenetics, and when you map all of the different personality types, which are driven by body types, there are 3 key body types, and then there are 3 overlapping body types from this model that I've worked with. And they all end up on this circle, so 360 degrees. And there's a diagonal line that you can put through this circle that divides the extroverts and the introverts. So from that perspective, you could say, well, it's all genetics, right? I got this from my mum, I got this from my dad, and I ended up being this. And you're either on one side or the other side. But I don't think it's that simple. I think it's a combination of both. And often it is, right? You may have introverted parents, so therefore you inherit introverted genetics, but they may live a life of very great extroversion. So you may have been born like this, but the life you actually led was completely the opposite to that, and therefore the behaviors that you picked up as a child and into adulthood were more extroverted. So I think it's a bit of it's nature and nurture. I don't think it's one thing or the other. I think it's always a combination. And it's fascinating because you're right. There's introverts, extroverts, but there are also ambiverts. There are people in the middle who can swing both ways. Also, there are introverts. I could call myself like an outgoing introvert. So I'm naturally introverted. I like my own company a lot, but I do like to socialize, and I do like to be with other people. That's really important to me. And I can turn on the charm, and I can seem like I'm an extrovert, but really I'm naturally an introvert. Yeah.
It's interesting because, like, in order for that to exist, you would think there's some sort of evolutionary benefit of being introverted versus extroverted. Like why some people have different wake periods because,
Yeah.
they're on watch.
Yeah.
Like the last
Yeah.
thing we want is a predator sneak up while you're sleeping because you're going to get up at 6 and do your
Exactly.
whatever. So, but anyways,
Exactly.
going to the burnout. So you've identified the staff members smashing down some coffees, but before they never did, and the whole world's about to implode. What are these triggers for these people to identify the problems around them?
Yeah, I mean that's a signal. That's a signal. I mean, if people start becoming disconnected or disinterested in their work, that's obviously another sign. There's that lethargy, excuse me, that kicks in where the commitment to their work starts to wane, and that can be another sign. So if you're working closely with people, you'll see that stuff. If you're in a different department or a report away, then that may not necessarily be so obvious. So I think the signals that you pick up with the people that are close to you are the most important because you can be the most helpful. That energy piece. So we've talked about the coffee thing, and that's a hint that people's energy levels are waning. It's a slow journey. Essentially what happens when you're pushing the boundaries is you demand more cortisol, so your cortisol production actually goes up. And those are the people that are a little bit more excitable. And if you add in the extra coffee as well, then that's just double excitable. And they can be a bit frantic, and their behavior can be a little bit on edge, and they can be a bit snappy, and they can be a bit short, and they can be inconsiderate. And that is like, potentially some behavior change that you can pick up reasonably quickly. That carries on for a certain amount of time. That cortisol pattern then changes, and that energy starts to dip. So instead of being revved right up, in fact, they actually just feel like they need a nap in the afternoon. They feel like they need to, more coffee at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon before they go home, sort of thing. So there's sort of different stages that people may go through from a I guess if you're looking at it from a more clinical point of view, that gives you hints as to where they may be. And if they're at that stage where they're napping at their desk, and once they sit down, their whole system down regulates, their eyes start getting drowsy. And I can attest to doing this myself. A few years back, I was always go, go, go. And then when I sat down in my chair to start doing some admin, just sitting in the chair was enough for me to start getting drowsy, and I would literally close my eyes and fall asleep. And this is in the middle of the day. So, that's worst case scenario, but there may be people in that situation. So, there's obviously safety implications with that sort of stuff. But, those are the sorts of patterns that you can see in terms of people's behavior.
Burnout's been a challenging thing for me. Like I'm never burnt out from activity. Like, I could work, smash out a 16-hour day, go to sleep, next day fine, keep it up for a period of time. The cost has been my interpretation of the pain or the justification, or the reason I'm going through this. Like, so for example, if I try something and it seems hopeless and nothing happens and there's no progression and there's no reassurance, I start to get burnt out, and then I start having negative thought patterns, and then I seek it out to reconfirm, oh, the world's fucked, it's all going. Then I get burnt out, but I don't actually get burnt out just from like, there is a physical component where like if I, run a marathon and then I do something fun, and then I just physically but it's very hard to hit that, I think, personally.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think burnout is?
Yeah, good point. There's sort of two things going on there, because you've got this whole sense of purpose thing, right? If you've got drive, you're getting up every day to work really, really hard, long days. That sense of purpose is probably what gets you out of bed, because you're on a mission. There's some purpose to why you're doing that. And I suppose when you hit roadblocks, those can be disconcerting, right? They can throw you off. They can, the wheels start to get a little bit wobbly. And I suppose, coming back to that sense of purpose is a really, really important component, because it is what drives you when the chips are down, when things are tough, when you're still trying to build momentum in a business or whatever it may be. So there's as you say, there's the physical stuff. There's that's going on regardless of whatever is going on. But then there's what's going on in your head in terms of, why am I doing this? It doesn't seem to be working. How long do I keep doing this before I change tack? And so, yeah, that mental fatigue, that toll that takes, and the language you use internally will have more of an impact than the physical stuff. Because as we know, right, the body does what the mind tells it to. The mind is the boss, right? So even if we are in a physical state of burnout, we can push through. You look at endurance athletes, you look at special forces troops, those sorts of guys that push their bodies to the absolute limit and show you what is actually capable, what we're capable of. We know it's possible. So, that balance between what's going on in your head and what's going on in your body, I think is really important. So a sense of purpose in life is one of those keys to getting out of bed in the morning because it gives you a purpose, but B, just having something to cling on to, having something that keeps you busy and gives you a greater sense of, that sort of that spiritual health, that sense of something bigger than yourself, or something that you're doing in terms of a contribution. And when you look at one of those health models, there's lots of health models out there, but one I like working with is Tifere Tapafa. You've got those 4 pillars of the Fare, and one of those key pillars to hold the roof up is that spiritual health. And if one of the 4 pillars is not strong, then the roof's going to fall in. So it's about having all 4 pillars strong and in place, so that the well-being is, and the roof is held up, and the well-being is in place and strong. So I think it tapped into that spiritual well-being, in terms of that sense of purpose and doing something for the greater good, as well as obviously, providing yourself an income.
Yeah, I think spirituality is an interesting thing to me. Like I'm as atheist as it can be, but I worship my purpose and values. And I think purpose is fundamentally just solving a problem you've witnessed or experienced for others. And then that's probably the most fulfilling thing you can do. Partly why your burnout is probably quite inspiring. Like, how did you define your spiritual purpose, or what does spirituality mean to you?
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm the same as you. I'm not a churchgoer. I'm not even a meditator. I sort of profess to trying it 1,000 times and still not succeeding. And I think to me it's very personal. So I like to listen to a lot of podcasts. I like to educate myself. I like to read a lot. I like to feel like I'm sort of filling my cup with those sorts of things, that education and knowledge that backs up the sort of path that I'm already on. And for me, that's a big element of that spiritual health. And I think mindfulness, it's a big umbrella term, mindfulness, and you can do it however you want to, but it's bringing mindfulness to the everyday things. And I can't remember the name of the book, but a mate of mine recommended it. And he said one of the components in there was talking about everyday things, but doing a really good job of it. And so standing at the sink, doing the dishes, the most boring chore in the world, which everybody has to do, instead of just sort of slapping the soap on and throwing the dishes onto the draining board, you actually take your time to make sure everything's spotlessly clean. You put it on the draining board properly. It's not going to fall off. You're very much in the moment of the thing that you're doing, and it could be the most mundane thing, or it could be the most exciting thing, and you still take the same amount of care and attention and detail with that task. And that really resonated for me. And I thought, that's I like that version of mindfulness. And so I've sort of adopted that. I've sort of thought, well, when I do things, I'm going to make sure I do them properly, and I'm going to walk away and go, I'm proud of that. So I don't know. I kind of like the Buddhism approach, the Eastern philosophies more than the Christian philosophies, and I sort of identify with those more. Yeah, that's as much as I've got.
Yeah, well, I mean, Buddhism is a tactical way to navigate life in your own mind. Christianity is like what it would look like to be a good person. Depending, what part you read, but New Testament seems like that. For me, I see meditation, like a lot of people talk about, it's kumbaya session, sitting there meditating, thinking about your breath. Fundamentally, your thoughts are like a snowball. It's like if you try not think about it, or if you try thinking about it, that just builds momentum. It goes the same direction. Meditation is kind of like there's the river. You could be in the river, or you can watch the river. If you're in the river, whatever the thought is, it's going to be more of them. If you're just watching it, you're not really freaking out. And a good way to do that is you're still thinking. Your mind doesn't stop thinking. All you're doing is observing something. You're watching the car. You're watching the fish come in that you question your existence. Why the fuck am I here? You're washing the dishes. You're right. So everyone is doing a form of meditation, and all it is just a break from reinforcing whatever thoughts going on in your head.
Yeah, I like that.
So, okay, so the person's fallen asleep on the desk. They're having 6 coffees. What's some of the most horrific burnout stories you've heard? Like, do you have any zingers of like, my wife left me for my stepson or whatever?
Crikey.
Stepson's not the right one. that would be a bit even weirder than
that's a stretch. Yeah. Good question. Burnout. I've had people who have changed careers, so I mean, it's nothing very exciting. But I think when people that have worked with me that have made those sorts of decisions, it's because they've had the opportunity to stop and reflect. And I don't think we do that very much or very well as organizations or as individuals. I think, people who are good at journaling, maybe tuned into that process and being able to stop and actually get your thoughts down. But, high flying executives from the 80s and 90s who are in their 40s or 50s didn't grow up with that sort of mentality there. It's Margaret Thatcher's era of go, go, go and, make lots of money. And I think, Generation X, which, I'm a part of, were very good at working hard, but not very good at balancing that with looking after themselves. And I think this generation and my kids are much better at sort of stopping and going, well, no, I'm not going to do that because that's just going to kill me. Why would I do that? Whereas, we just run at it. So, there's generational difference. And I think when you get that opportunity to stop and reflect and go, what is my life about? Do I still want to keep doing this? Do I want to be the high-flying executive who's got this great job and an amazing salary, but no time with my family, not very healthy, couldn't run around the block if you asked them to, probably get a dog walk in every other day, maybe at the most, and just sleep at the weekend or go to the pub because there's not much energy left for the days off. And those who have had the time to reflect and go, actually, no, that isn't what I want to do. I'm going to change roles, find something that, may not pay as well, may not be as demanding, but allows me that balance. And those have happened. That's happened on a number of occasions with people I've worked with. And I think, they've either stopped themselves getting into burnout or they've been in that burnout and realized that they needed to do something with their lives so that path didn't continue down, that treacherous road.
Whereas if you dig 2 centimeters deep, most people are living lives to meet the expectation of someone else. You know what I mean? Like, oh, my dad, I'm trying to prove my dad I'm worthy of his love because I never made him proud. You know what I mean? Or like, my mum abandoned me, so I got to be useful to other people so they don't leave me. Like, you're pretty much your identity is just shaped by someone out there saying things, and then now it's in here saying things. So, okay.
Yeah.
What about, you got your burnout, you got your health, you're doing your herbal teas or whatever. What is your take on balance? Because for me, I'm pretty much just doing whatever I want to do each day, which is something meaningful, and then I work hard. So if someone close to me is sick, I just don't work that day and just hang out with them. And I work a lot, but then the time I'm with people, my phone's off. I'm completely intent and focused on them, so I don't feel out of balance.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Being able to have that balance is good. I mean, obviously, if you're working for yourself, you have the ability to do that and step away for a day. That's great. It's funny. Every time I come across this whole work-life balance thing, the more messages I get back is there is no balance. All there is an opportunity to look for balance when that opportunity comes. Work goes like that. Work will have intense periods and then it will have less intense periods. And so the less intense periods give you the opportunity to breathe and think and find some of that balance. And then it will ratchet up, and there'll be long days, there'll be a project deadline, or there'll be a client thing or a customer project that has to be finished. Those days get out of whack and the balance goes again. So I don't think there's ever a perfect day where that balance is in place all the time, but I think it goes in fits and starts, and it's people's ability to look for that balance when there's a time to breathe, rather than going, right, where's the next thing? Just filling that time with the next project or whatever it may be. And different roles have, different challenges. Some people are 9 to 5. Some people are working with overseas clients, so therefore they're working in the middle of the night, or they have to start very early, and an 8-hour day becomes a 12-hour day. It just depends on the organization, I suppose. But yeah, that balance thing probably doesn't exist. And I think when people like me go into organizations saying, "Oh, we need to work on work-life balance," they just laugh, because it just sounds so out of touch, and I think you've just got to help people find the micro. James Clear's Atomic Habits is a great tool, because it helps you identify those 1%ers, and those 1%ers, if you get enough of them, then have a big enough impact. And so I like referencing those sort of things. What's something you can do in your day that doesn't add any more time, but all it is a slight tweak of behavior that actually makes a difference to you. So you don't have to look for the time, you just have to look for the slight behavior change. And so that's where I sort of start looking for the low-hanging fruit to help people.
Yeah, it's good, but I never read it. I just did what it said. It's like make the good habits easier and the bad habits harder. So I was like, I was a bit fat because I was doing less than 1,000 steps a day, and I'll go figure. So then I was like, okay, well, when I have a coffee, I'll just go for a walk. And then I was like, okay, every time I do 10 cold calls, I'll go for a walk, and then I lost 10 kilos.
Nice.
But it's interesting that. I think it's just not that deep, So like if someone calls me, let's say I've only ever managed a team of 12, so maybe when it gets all CEO level, I have no idea, and I'm just being idealistic. But it's just not that deep. Like if there's a crisis and someone's life or death, call the 111. Like, what the fuck am I gonna do? It's like you work, and then there's output. Like your output's diminished, so you're not actually accomplishing more. You're just running on the treadmill to prove to your dad that you're worthy of his love. I'm not projecting.
Yeah,
I don't have any.
No. It's only come up twice.
Yeah, no, it's just a few times. But I don't get it. Is it really? What can you do more than Elon Musk is pretty good, but his brain's cooked. He's just obsessed over all the horrible things in his.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what that guy's end game is. It's weird. I just saw a list on Facebook of the 10, 20 richest people in the world, and their national flag was next to their name, and I think probably 3/4 of them are American. Elon was at the top. You got Bill and Warren Buffett and a few others in their top 5. But yeah, I mean, he's a different animal, isn't he? Animal's probably the best description, because that's how he approaches most things.
When he was 12, he had an existential crisis or something when he was a kid, whereas life has no meaning. What's the point? What should I do with my life? And then he's like, well, the universe has the answer. And so we need to live long enough so that we can find the answer to the universe, and that's my existence. So that's why his whole thing's like prolonging humanity. Or he's just full of shit trying to make heaps of money. Don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know him well enough, and I have not studied him at all. So, I couldn't tell you.
But all I could say is when he talks, you don't want his brain. It's just... Yeah, it's chaotic. So anyways, okay. And now with your culture in the team, you've identified there's an issue. Do you just have kumbaya sessions, high fives? Do you push-up competitions? Like, how do we fix the...
Yeah, no, not so much kumbaya. More education. So it's probably a combination of both education and like workshop type work, and then coaching. So the education is delivered in the workshop, and then the coaching is where the actual action takes place. So I'll organize programs so that one follows the other, and then everybody that was at the workshop has the option, but ideally attends the coaching that follows up. That gives them a chance to pick my brains if there's stuff they didn't understand. It allows me to understand how engaged they are, who turns up, who doesn't turn up, how many questions they ask. And so I'm sort of reading that room and sort of then how that impacts on the whole organization, and getting some commitment from those who do turn up as to, well, what you learned, what is it that you're going to actually put into place? So what actions can you commit to? And that's where there's probably between 3 and 5 things that I'll try and encourage people to say, oh, I'm going to start doing this, or I'm going to change that to that. I'm going to do this, and this. And then that's the beginning of their journey in terms of the change that will help them get to where they need to be. And with regular check-ins after those coaching sessions, the follow-up with support and accountability. So that's the sweet combination is support and accountability. That's where the change occurs over time. So people start making some new habits, and when they become habits, they drop that one, and then we find something new to put on that list, and away they go again. So that list's always sort of revolving and changing as they embed these things in their routines and their lives.
You see like a common thread, or like, the manager's an asshole and just demeans everyone, or like the type of person that buys your service is really loving or just not good at making money, or what are sort of the common threads you see from entering the organization?
It can be a manager. It can be, like I said, when everybody's got that certain level of burnout, then you've got to think, well, why is everybody being affected in the same way? Look up. And so that could be the courageous conversation, right? The feedback says it's you. And so you have that conversation with them, and sometimes they're the person that got you there in the first place, right? So they are aware that something's going on, but not necessarily aware enough to know that it's them. And so that can often be, that's then where the coaching needs to go, right? The coaching is for the person that's affecting everybody else. So that's not uncommon. And I think, if they're clever enough to get you in the first place, they're probably humble enough to be able to take the feedback and make the changes that they need to change. And so, you've obviously got to get their buy-in on that, but that can have a big impact, right? Because they then have an impact on everybody else who they work with.
Yeah, you get some horror stories. Oh, you got another one?
No, well, what was the second part of the question? Because that was the first.
Well, you're essentially going to look behind the curtain and being like, what's it really going on, and what is really going on? What are people doing right? What are they doing wrong? What's the secret? Give us a.
I think generally everybody wants to do a good job, right? I mean, there's always the one or two who, they're the wrong fit. They shouldn't be there, right? Every organization has those. They're the dick, right? The office dick. If you don't know who the office dick is, it's you. And so that aside, then it's everybody who does want to do a good job, and some people want to do such a good job they burn themselves out doing that good job, and so helping them realize that, even though they're doing long days and they're doing an incredible job, they need to still look after themselves, right? When they leave that office, and they go home, they've still got to do all the things that they need to do as them, not as an employee. And sometimes people can get worked up about how important it is to do a good job. And yes, doing a good job is important, but it's coming back to that balance thing again that doesn't exist. It's at the end of the day, that organization pays your wage, but also that organization may make you redundant tomorrow, right? So where does the loyalty stop? And I'm not necessarily going to answer that, but everybody's is different in terms of how much they give, and as opposed to how much they take, and how that affects their energy levels and the quality of their life.
But it's crazy how someone can engineer such a horrific story about the cause of their unhappiness, and yet lack the courage or foresight to take a step out of it. I get it. It's scary. It's hard. I've done it. It's just, it's like the story of the dog, Tony Robbins' story. I don't know if you ever heard it, with a dog and the nail. It's a good one.
No. So
it's like every day he goes to the same spot, perfect amount of sun, perfect amount of wind, sits there, admires the neighbor's dog. She's pretty fit. And then he suddenly there's like a nail in the deck where he sits. And he'll howl and complain and not move until the pain is greater than the fear of change. And I think that's just the reality. It's like, but blaming people just gives them power over you, and it's not that deep. But anyways, that's any closing remarks? Because my phone might die. I don't know why. Should be charging.
Sure. Hey, look, I know, I agree. I don't think we realise just how much the power sits with us, right? I follow a guy called Peter Crone. I don't know if you know him. He's an English guy who lives in the US, and fascinating character. He calls himself the mind architect, and he talks about we're looking for the thing, whatever the thing is, or the experience having got the thing, and you can imagine having that. But what we do day to day is we drive ourselves into the ground looking to get the thing, and we can have the experience of having that thing without necessarily might be buying a car or buying a house. But we can imagine that. We can put ourselves in a situation where we've experienced that, and so we are enough in ourselves. But we feel like we need to get the next thing to feel like we are who we should be. Does that make sense? It's that whole extrinsic, intrinsic sort of It's fascinating. We're just dissatisfied with ourselves until we've got that next thing, and we can have it now in our thoughts. But no, we need to drive ourselves into the ground to get it.
Yeah, when I get there, I'm happy. Yeah, I wish I could give people everything they ever wanted so they know how much they already have. Oh, look at that poetic. Should we end on that? Thanks for coming on, man.
Awesome. No worries. Thank you for having me.